We begin tonight with a question. How on earth did this happen?
This is an extraordinary, potentially dangerous, and without a doubt embarrassing breach of national security.
A journalist was inadvertently included on a text message chain in which the president's national security team was planning an attack on Yemen's Houthi rebels.
Then, on the day of the attack, with the journalist still included in the text message chain, the Secretary of Defense spelled out exactly how it would play out 2 hours before it did.
This all happened on an encrypted text messaging service called Signal, which is not approved for sharing classified information.
Ed O'Keefe is at the White House with more about the security breach and the president's reaction tonight. Ed?
Good evening. The senior officials on the group text debated whether or not the U.S. should strike Houthi targets and swap details of the airstrikes. The details so sensitive, the reporter who accidentally received it all opted not to publish them out of concern for national security. The U.S. bombed Houthi rebel positions in Yemen on March 15th in response to the group's continued attacks on commercial shipping vessels in the Red Sea and missile strikes against Israel. The classified details of the U.S. attack plans were first shared 2 days earlier with Jeffrey Goldberg, editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine. He'd been added, accidentally, to a group chat of senior administration officials on Signal, invited by National Security Advisor Michael Waltz.
I've never heard of anything quite like this.
In all, 18 people were in the chat, including Vice President Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard.
People have devices that are extraordinarily convenient, and government officials are just like you and me. They like convenience. They're just like you and me. They sometimes send text to people they didn't mean to send text to. The consequences here are a lot higher for that sort of thing than in regular civilian life.
Goldberg watched on his phone as the group debated striking the Houthis. And then, on the morning of the attacks, Hegseth shared operational details about the forthcoming strike, including the timing, the targets, and the types of weapons used. Once the strikes concluded, the group exchanged emojis in celebration, flames, fist bumps, and American flags. Sharing top-secret details over Signal likely violated the Espionage Act, according to CBS News national security consultant Sam Vinograd.
Operational plans related to the Houthis and strikes in Yemen more than likely are classified or at least operationally sensitive. So it'll be important to see whether the Department of Justice opens up an investigation into a potential leak of classified information.
Goldberg's article first published on Monday while the president was holding a cabinet meeting with most of the people on the text group.
I don't know anything about it. I'm not a big fan of The Atlantic. To me, it's a magazine that's going out of business. I think it's not much of a magazine.
And Ed O'Keefe joins us now from the White House. Ed, what's the White House saying behind the scenes?
The press secretary says tonight, John, that the president has the utmost confidence in his national security team, including National Security Advisor Michael Waltz, whose office admits Jeffrey Goldberg shouldn't have been on the text chain.
Ed, you've covered the White House for several years now. Have you ever seen a lapse like this? I mean, how big a deal are we talking about here?
Oh, this is a big deal, Maurice, because this is the kind of internal conversation that normally happens in the basement behind thick doors in the Situation Room, far away from reporters ever go. And the reason they happen in a room like that is so that they can be protected from foreign interference or spies. And that's what has Democrats, Republicans, and intelligence officials in this town and across the country concerned, that if they're discussing this kind of information in an unclassified setting, what else might they be discussing?
Ed O'Keefe at the White House. Thank you, Ed.
National security correspondent Charlie D'Agata is at the Pentagon. So, Charlie, tell us more about Signal here. This is the text messaging app the national security team was using.
Yeah, so Signal is a messaging app similar to WhatsApp, but officials tell me the rules are black and white. It is strictly forbidden to share classified information like this on an unclassified system like Signal. There are specific secure systems and specific devices for sharing classified information.
Charlie, they talked about a target package. What is a target package?
Yeah, John, it's essentially what to hit in what order. Sending out warplanes, including the precise timings of airstrikes and the targets they're hitting, puts aircraft and pilots in danger. The United States doesn't want adversaries to know when it's coming and exact locations of the target list. The Houthis do have a missile force and have shot down American drones.
All right, Charlie D'Agata at the Pentagon. Thank you so much, Charlie.
The chat was all the talk today.
The security breach that allowed a journalist to join a chat in which the Trump National Security Team was planning an attack on Houthi rebels in Yemen. The president downplayed it, insisting there was nothing classified in the chat, which used the texting app known as Signal.
On Capitol Hill, members of Congress did what they usually do, choosing sides and adjectives. Republicans call the breach a mistake.
But Democrat Mark Warner chose sloppy, careless, incompetent, and topped it all off with fiasco.
Republican John Kennedy said most Americans don't care about the breach, but fellow Republican Lindsey Graham acknowledged we dodged a bullet.
And CBS News has learned the administration was warned recently not to use the Signal app because it is not secure. Ed O'Keefe is at the White House. Ed?
Good evening, guys. That's right. A little more than 2 weeks before that journalist was accidentally added to the group text, CBS News has learned the National Security Agency issued this memo warning against using Signal. Because it's so popular, the NSA warned, Signal could be a, quote, high-value target to intercept sensitive information. President Trump insisted today the texting troubles caused by his top officials weren't a big deal.
There was no classified information, as I understand it.
But Atlantic magazine editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg, who was added accidentally to the Signal group chat, says top officials were discussing sensitive, secretive war plans to bomb Houthi rebels in Yemen.
I found it completely improbable that the top national security leadership of the United States would be discussing on a commercial messaging app the possible imminent attack on another country, and that they would mistakenly, I assume mistakenly, invite the editor-in-chief of the Atlantic magazine into their discussion.
Goldberg reported that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth shared highly sensitive operational details about the March 15 strikes, including targets, weapons the U.S. would be deploying, and when they'd be fired. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, who originally invited Goldberg to the chat, was one of many Trump allies today who sought to discredit him.
This journalist, Mr. President, wants the world talking about more hoaxes and this kind of nonsense rather than the freedom that you're enabling.
Democrats on Capitol Hill were infuriated the administration wasn't taking any responsibility for the mistake, grilling National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard and CIA Director John Ratcliffe, both of whom were part of the group chat.
Director Ratcliffe, this was a huge mistake, correct?
No.
This is utterly unprofessional. There's been no apology. There has been no recognition of the gravity of this error.
Gabbard acknowledged she was traveling abroad during part of the chat, as was the president's envoy to the Middle East and Russia, Steve Witkoff, who was in Moscow at the time. Chris O'Leary worked in counterterrorism at the FBI.
This is signaling to the entire world that our most senior leaders have poor operational security, and there's an opportunity here to maybe pursue them.
Now, Ed, what else have we learned about how the White House uses these types of apps available to the public?
Well, first off, we know the president still uses a personal cell phone. Unclear if he discusses or receives any sensitive information or if there's any protection on that phone. As for Signal, we know administration officials today were reassessing how often to use it, but it is quite popular with Trump administration officials, as it was during the Biden era, because they discuss internally and externally all sorts of issues on it. The Trump team sees it as a convenient tool that is secure because there's been no evidence of it ever being hacked.
Ed, Maurice and I were talking earlier about the fact the White House says there's no classified information here, and we both said so they'd be okay with releasing it and letting Goldberg release it. Are they okay with it?
Well, not quite. Look, they're in cleanup mode. They acknowledge this is a mistake, but they are in no way encouraging Goldberg to release the rest of the information he has, believing private conversations should have and should remain private.
One more thing here, Ed, just 15 seconds or so. What would happen if a low-level staffer did this kind of thing? Would they still have a job?
If it was someone in the military, they'd likely be court-martialed and kicked out. Intelligence, diplomatic, and military officials, no. You don't share classified or sensitive information on commercially available apps because it's against the law.
Ed O'Keefe at the White House for us. Thank you, Ed.
The Secretary of Defense insists nobody was texting war plans.
And Pete Hegseth says, I know exactly what I'm doing.
Today, we learned exactly what he was doing in that chat in which the Trump National Security Team discussed plans for a U.S. attack on Yemen's Houthi rebels.
We know because the journalist who was accidentally invited into the chat released the text today.
Ed O'Keefe is at the White House, where earlier today they were still contending nothing Hegseth texted was classified. But Ed, did that change?
Well, here at the White House tonight, officials cannot rule out that someone might lose their job over all of this. That's because while the president and others are publicly downplaying the significance of it all, half a dozen national security officials across the government tell CBS News tonight that because the text messages included specific targets and weapon systems, they believe the information is classified. After initially withholding what he considered to be information too sensitive for publication, Atlantic magazine editor-in-chief Jeffrey Goldberg today shared it anyway. Why did you publish what you published?
Because on Tuesday, the President of the United States said there's nothing classified or sensitive in the emails, in the texts. I think people should see for themselves. They're saying nothing happened. I'm saying that this represents a serious breach in national security and communications. That's what journalism is for.
The new article revealed that on the morning of March 15th, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth shared with Vice President Vance and other senior officials the specific times F-18 fighter jets would launch to strike a target terrorist. Less than 2 hours later, Hegseth said, sea-based Tomahawks would be launched.
It sent a chill down my spine. I mean, I'm getting on my phone, sitting in a supermarket parking lot, a plan from the Secretary of Defense about an attack that's coming up in 2 hours.
Today, traveling in Hawaii, Hegseth once again defended his decision to send the texts.
There's no units, no locations, no routes, no flight paths, no sources, no methods, no classified information.
We showed the text messages today to Chuck Hagel, who served as President Obama's defense secretary and is a former Republican senator. So this is the screen grab of the texts that was published this morning. Put your defense secretary hat on for a second. If you read that, what is this information?
Well, this is very real, classified information. You talk about when a launch is going to be held, when the mission is a go, what aircraft are being used to strike a target, drones and so on. If that's not classified, I don't know what is.
Traveling in Jamaica, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, also on the text chain, said,
"Someone made a mistake. Someone made a big mistake."
While his own cabinet secretaries have insisted the texts were not classified, when asked today, President Trump couldn't say.
I don't know. I'm not sure. You'll have to ask the various people involved. I really don't know.
Ed, I gather there is guidance in the government about how to handle this kind of information going back to 2014.
That's right. It was declassified in 2016 from the Director of National Intelligence, and it essentially describes what exactly would be classified or top secret. And it says any information about planning an attack should remain top secret for at least 25 years. It's another example of top officials flouting protocol and doing something that lower-ranking officials know would get them in big trouble.
And Ed, we understand there's now bipartisan interest in getting to the bottom of all of this.
That's right. The Republican and Democratic heads of the Senate Armed Services Committee today said they're calling for an expedited investigation by the Pentagon's Inspector General. They want a classified briefing from someone in the Trump administration about all of this. Roger Wicker, who's the Republican chairman from Mississippi, called it a successful attack on the Houthis, but, quote, a shame that this security question is distracting the public from the success of that mission. Guys.
Okay. Ed O'Keefe at the White House tonight. Thank you.
So what exactly does classified mean?
We checked the Justice Department website and found the law defines classified as any information or material that has been determined by the government to require protection against unauthorized disclosure for reasons of national security. More fallout from revelations that the Trump National Security Team discussed plans for an attack on Houthi rebels in Yemen on the text messaging app Signal. Republican and Democratic senators are asking the Defense Department Inspector General to investigate. Ed O'Keefe is at the White House.
Federal District Court judge here in Washington is ordering several top Trump administration officials to keep copies of text messages they received about forthcoming attacks on Houthi rebel targets between March 11th and March 15th. the same text messages that were accidentally sent to a journalist. The president is said to be privately irritated about the incident, but is standing by White House National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. CBS News has learned the White House vigorously debated whether Waltz should resign, but he never offered to, and the president never asked. Still, one source described the situation as, quote, still a hot potato.